Well, Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, as I said before, is planning a trip to Israel as the relationship between Albanese and Bibi Netanyahu and their governments continues to fracture. Following a spate of anti-Israel attacks in Sydney in Melbourne, Sydney's most senior Jewish MP will spend a week in Israel after cancelling a planned visit in October of last year. Joining me now to discuss this and so much more is my very good friend, Daily Telegraph journalist James Willis, and my other very good friend, Sky News host Liz Storer.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
See you, James.
Great to see you. Now, James, before I get to this trip, though, I want to just ask you, because, you know, we work together at the Daily Telegraph. You've got a great story that you're working on at the Telegraph. Tell us a little bit about it, because I want people to go out and check this out tomorrow when the paper hits the newsstands.
Yeah, it was interesting. We've had a response in the last 2 hours, a rare response from the Australian, the ADF, the Defence Force, because we made some inquiries today off the back of a number of people coming to us to say their kids had waited between 12 and 18 months from the moment they applied to the moment they actually got in
to get into the army.
Now, these are fit young kids. They might have had, you know, a minor issue as a kid, like asthma or something like that, but they were waiting 18 months in some cases to get into the army. We are meant to have this massive shortage of troops. We learnt today that the recruitment with the ADF has been outsourced to a Swiss firm to the tune of $1.3 billion. Defence has said they're underperforming. But the development tomorrow, which is quite amazing, James, is that last year, 64,000 people, which is actually bigger than the size of our ADF, applied to get into the Defence Force, and yet we can't get them out the other end. And because they've outsourced this service, people are just getting stuck in the traps and in a lot of cases giving up and just saying, I'm going to do something else instead.
This is absolutely shocking, James, and we're going to check this out tomorrow in the Daily Telegraph. So thanks for bringing us up to speed on that. But I want to get back now to the other big news. This big trip here, James. I'll stick with you here with Liberal MP Julian Leeser calling this a pre-election trick. It's hard to disagree with that. What do you reckon?
Well, I think in isolation, I think it's difficult to be critical of the idea of Mark Dreyfus wanting to go to Israel. I think he's an appropriate person to go. But the problem for Labor is whatever decisions they make at this point in time are going to be seen as too little too late, when based on what you've said on the international stage, some of their reactions to some of the local events that we've seen in Sydney and Melbourne, and some of the senior ministers, particularly in Sydney, where there are large Muslim electorates that have been largely quiet on this issue. So in isolation, I don't think this makes it any worse, but look, Labor's been far too slow to the party on this issue.
Well, that's right, James. Liz Storer, though, I mean, this seems very much like, you know, after months and months and really more than a year of just, you know, mismanagement of this issue and going in for the most left-wing and pandering approach to Israel, suddenly they're trying to shift gears right before an election. Do they just expect people to forget everything they've done, including, you know, denying visas to enter the country to former Israeli cabinet ministers?
They don't just expect it, they are counting on it. And I got to disagree with James, because I don't think it's hard to take a problem with Mark Dreyfus wanting to go at all. I have often thought that if I were Mark Dreyfus, I would have stepped down from cabinet by now. Because since October 7, all my government, the government that I am serving in the cabinet of, has done is mouth off from the sidelines at what my country's up to, just trying to defend their right to exist. Obviously, he hasn't been among that number, but he shares a front bench with many who share very anti-Israel sentiments. They've done nothing to hide it. And he has just been silent on them, as you've got to be if you're part of Labor caucus. But if this was a man of conviction, I dare say at the very least he would have stepped down from cabinet by now. But this is the point where things get so bad it's almost comical.
Liz,
that all of a sudden they're like, let's just roll out the Jewish guy on cabinet, see if we can do damage control.
I think looking for principle in the Labor Party is, you know, you might need to find a microscope for that, Liz. I will, though, note that...
But if Mark Dreyfus has any, as a Jewish man serving in this anti-Israel government, surely you could expect better from him.
Well, I don't think you're standing down, though. I think like he can show leadership and represent the Jewish community in his role. What this has exposed...
Would you say
well, fair enough.
I think he has.
We're not going to solve...
for sure, but it's exposed
it's
the deep
rather
fracture in the
late.
Labour
We're not going to solve...
He tried to go last year, so I don't think we should be too harsh on him on this one.
No, we should be harsh on Albanese for this very cynical attempt to tuck the Jewish community back in at this very late date.
And
we're not going to solve... We're not going to solve the Middle East, though, on this set, which we like to call Camp David. But I do want to talk more about this election that's coming up because, of course, cost of living is the other huge thing. And the Prime Minister has been spending cash all over the place, $7 million for Queensland Bruce Highway. Ooh. But here's the thing. He's not saying anything about whether there's going to be any tax changes in the platform coming up to the election, as we now see the tax take in this country continue to increase. Now, this, James Willis, seems like there is so much need for reform here. The tax take in this country is now income taxes make up 53.5% of the federal income tax. That's before booze tax, petrol tax, every other tax that they charge. This is, this was supposed to end at COVID. It's not ended. It's stuck. How bad is this?
Well, the figures that you highlighted then are significant, and it's obviously an issue for business and the taxes that they're paying as well. I think for both sides, one of the most uninspiring things we've seen since COVID is the lack of genuine debate around reform of our tax system and actually get the economy moving in the right direction. Instead, in the last 2 years, all we've had is record government spending, a giant bureaucracy, energy rebates. The reality is most people want to be left alone.
Well,
they want to be able to work, earn money, and governments get out of their lives, really, and we've had none of that debate.
But, Liz, we've got a bigger tax take, a bigger share of GDP going to government, than we've had in decades.
Yes.
Have we got to the point now where politically it's impossible to talk about anything that's real reform because reform creates winners and losers, and some people who are doing inefficient things are going to wind up losing out because we make the economy more efficient? Are we now in a position where we can't even politically talk about reform?
I hope not, because this is something that Trump has certainly taken in America by the gonads and is currently swinging around his head most gleefully.
That's a lovely image there, Liz. Thank you.
Entire government departments, namely the Federal Department of Education. He's got his mates Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy heading up DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. He's talking DOGE, my bad. He's talking about absolutely gutting entire departments. I often say of the ridiculous taxes that we're copping now, we wouldn't mind so much if this was being well spent. There are countries like Germany where an over 50% tax bracket is pretty much the norm and everyone's used to it, but things run well and a lot of things are free, which is not the case here. What we have is government overspending on the most ridiculous things that the average person, it doesn't pass the pub test. But for me, it doesn't matter what promises, tax-related or other, the Labor government takes to the election, because we all know, given the promises they took to the last election, they don't last longer than a breath mint.
Liz, I'm glad you mentioned Germany, because, of course, Germany is the country that shut down all their nuclear reactors, and now they're relying on wind and solar, and they're in recession and they're poor. They can't make anything anymore. But are we learning the lesson here in Australia? Because after a $2 billion proposed project was shelved in Kingston in South Australia last week, finally some good news, it seems all of South Australia's offshore wind industry is dead in the water following the axing of the Port McDowell project in March last year. James Willis, it seems like there's suddenly a big shift saying maybe we don't have to destroy the environment to save the environment. Is it time for Labor to give up on this whole wind dream?
Well, I think the thing that people have badly underestimated with this net zero transition is the social licence you need with farmers. And there's now compensation deals going on all over the country because people go, well, hang on, this is a massive, Harbour Bridge-sized tower in my backyard. And the environmental impacts, which are the reason that we block a lot of gas projects and traditional fossil fuel projects and mines and stuff like that. But we've heard people like Bob Brown in Tasmania say that wind farms shouldn't go ahead because there's 10 parrots of this particular species left. And these things are going on. And the problem with wind is most of the time it's not very effective. And it's being put in parts of the country where there's not all that much wind. We've had issues on the Illawarra And for most people, it's the social licence where farmers simply don't want it in their backyard because of their land values.
And Liz, you know, I have interviewed people who live around these solar farms and wind farms and what they're trying to do, and they tear communities absolutely apart. I mean, it seems to me that this is a situation where the inner city greenies are forcing, you know, the rubes, as they think of them, who live out in the bush, to pay the price for their green dreams.
This is yet another class war. It really is. These elites, inner city elites or MPs even, it's the powerful people punching down on the little guys who have to pay for it. Nobody wants it in their backyard. But I must say, this project falling over is such a gift to the Libs coming up on this election, because yet again, it's like Labor's never going to deliver on their 82% renewables by 2030. That is now just 5 years away. It was always pie in the sky, unicorn nonsense. And once again, every time one of these projects falls over, all the Libs have to do is sit back, laugh and say, we told you so.
Well, bingo, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that. James Willis, Liz Storr, thank you so much.